Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining our Rural Township Economy and Retail Property Discussion with Bob Curran, CEO of AfricaScope. My name is Paul Steegers. I head up South African Consumer and Industrial Equity Research at Nedbank. I'm joined by my colleague Ridwan Lunat, who heads up our property equity research function here at Nedbank. He will be responsible for the Q&A at the end of this presentation. Before I introduce Bob, Bob's going to do a presentation, obviously, and at the end there'll be time for questions and answers. If you do have questions, please raise your hand, and then we'll address those in the order they are received. Bob Curran is an economist and a seasoned research survey professional with many years of experience with grassroots policy and strategy development. His area of specialization is in financial access and has been integrally involved in the conducting of consumer surveys across Africa and Pakistan. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to hand over the floor to you, so please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. And good afternoon to everybody. The presentation today would be looking at our robust spatial data and demonstrating how we use our extensive data sets to assist brand owners, to assist retailers, mall owners, to take better decisions, and mainly in terms of locating of their facilities, particularly in the retail area. We have a number of very, very important data sets that we have available to ourselves, and in spatial formats, both tabular and spatial formats. The consumer data comes from the Media All Products Survey in South Africa, which is the largest consumer survey in the country. I will address that during this presentation. We also have demographic estimates to 2022. The census data, we had the census last year. It's unlikely that the census data will be released for quite some time yet. There are some significant concerns over the data. And so as a company, we've been updating the census data at a very local level since about 2000. So we have 22 odd years of experience in that. And we're using spatial imagery, satellite imagery, and also statistical projections. The living standards measures gives us an indication of the wealth and poverty of our population and where they live. Income data, we have shopping malls and their trade areas, and we'll talk a bit about that. We have crime data down to a police station level, so we can have an understanding of the levels of crime at a very local level. Then we have our Township Atlas product, our gross geographic product, which gives us an indication of development, economic development, again at a very local level. Mortality rates, poverty data, fast food expenditure at a local level. We've mapped over 150,000 retail outlets. We have media footprints. We have extensive data for African countries as well, looking at also financial access and our retail census data. So we use those data sets in what we call economic geography, and economic geography really looks at the complex interrelationship between supply and demand, and allows our customers to understand what they need to do at a local level, both in terms of developing their networks and also in terms of the consumer demand at this local level, not just high national representation of the data. Our consumer data comes from a product that I mentioned before, was the MAP survey, and we've taken that consumer survey and modeled and mapped the data down to a local level. The green dots on the map across South Africa indicate to the extent to which the survey is conducted, both in urban and very deep rural areas. As I said, it gives us the most extensive understanding of consumer behavior, which translates into consumer demand for various products across the country at our local levels. We use this information and model and map the data into our township product. We have mapped over the 532 major townships across South Africa, and these townships make up a total area of about 4,200 square kilometers. Just to give you some perspective on that, that is greater than the Joburg and Durban metropolitans combined, which are just on 3,900 square kilometers. It's home to 19 million adults live in the townships, which is about 40% of our adult population. In Gauteng, there's about 8.8 million, 46% of the Gauteng population living in townships. In KwaZulu-Natal, we have 2.5 million people, about 13% of the KZN population, and down in the Western Cape, 1.8 million living in townships across the Cape Province. We used then this spatial data down to the local township boundary area. And I need to stress this, that whatever data we're looking at is only in relation to the township boundaries. It's not provincial data. Try to project it down to get an understanding. So looking at Gauteng, for example, and saying, well, that township represents the Gauteng province. It doesn't. And we take that down to the actual township level. And that helps us tremendously in terms of developing socioeconomic policy, looking at service delivery and advising on how and when service delivery is needed, looking at economic development and working with marketers and retailers in terms of route to market strategies. So let's look at the boundaries of Soweto. Soweto is South Africa's largest townships, and its population has grown at about 480,000 in the last 12 years. So we do see growth happening in the townships. And just to give you an idea of what Soweto would look like, for example, I look at this map here, and you can see the growth in the population. It's home to about 1.7 million Black South Africans. It's also home to about 2.5 million white South Africans. In terms of economically active population, about 69% of the population of Soweto is economically active adults. And of course, there's been some steady growth over the years in terms of that economic activity. In terms of household sizes, it's remained constant around about the 3.6 to down to 3.4 in recent years, and the gender split is pretty much on par. When we look at the age distribution of Soweto, there isn't a particular age group that isn't well represented within the townships. Obviously, the aged population, as with the total population in South Africa, diminishes. But having a look at the significant numbers of babies and young people, young adults, there's a significant opportunity for a host of products in the Soweto township. Jumping down to the Cape, Khayelitsha is the largest township in the Western Cape. It's also the fourth largest in South Africa, and its population has grown at around about just over 100,000 in the last 12 years. In terms of the economically active, 68% of adults are economically active in in Khayelitsha, as we see the good steady growth in the population, the overall size, a good spread of generational adults and kids and young adults, and the household sizes remain pretty constant at 3. Slight split towards females, slightly more dominant than males in Khayelitsha. Jumping down to KZN, we look at Mlazi, for example, the largest township in KZN, 6th largest in South Africa, and the population has grown at about 72,000 in the last 12 years. The population of Mlazi has had a kind of up and down history where there have been dips in the population. So it is still on the upward trend, but not as fast as the other townships have been growing. Economically active population has been steadily growing, but leveled out in recent years. But 66% of adults are economically active. The household sizes have gone down from 3.9 all the way down to, in 2010, down to 2.8. This is a result of the growth in the informal settlements around and inside and around the Umlazi township. Many of our clients also like to look at the larger townships in greater context, so that they're looking at asking us to develop an understanding of larger townships or the clusters of townships. And so on the East Rand, for example, we cluster Katlehong, Vosloorus, Tekoza, and Spruit View. Around Pretoria is Shoshanguve, Mokopane, Wintersveld, and Garankuwa. And then, of course, in the Durban North cluster, which is north of Mlazi, we look at KwaMashu, Inanda, Mtumzuma, Newlands, and Claremont. Just to give you a perspective of the differences in home ownership, for example, across the townships, it's important to understand that not all townships are exactly the same. There are significant differences across the townships of South Africa, and local understanding of all those townships is very important, particularly for the marketing of a diverse range of products. So, for example, in Khayelitsha, 71% of the households claim to be privately owned. That differs from Soweto, that goes to 50, just over 50%. And Tembisa, which is our second largest township in Gauteng, has a majority of houses are rented from a private individual. And what we see there in terms of the population of Tembisa is the predominance of younger, well, let's call them sort of young adults, the 30 to 35 age groups, and they tend to be more migrant in terms of their status, and therefore in that township we see a predominance of backyard shacks, for example, and renting from private owners. There's a tendency in the townships to move business to the residential areas. So, for example, you've got auto traders and repairmen guys working from home. The picture on the right shows a laundry. There's a traditional healer, a prophet. And also we see significant growth in the spaza shops, which are built as an add-on room to the main dwelling, as you can see in the bottom right picture. So what we are seeing is a a significant growth of retail activity at the household level. There's also a growth in lifestyle estates, particularly starting off in Soweto, where Calgary has developed Jabulani Junction. This has biometric access, 24-hour manned security gates, clubhouses. It has jogging trails, and it's important to know that these were previously only available in the so-called suburbs of Johannesburg and Cape Town, Durban, etc. And now we're seeing these developments taking place at a township level. Calgary has also developed one at Vloershof with a starting price of about $500,000. So a significant ability to develop this kind of lifestyle living estates in the future, we believe. And these are built right next to, in many cases, RDP houses. And what we are now seeing is significant opportunities for the private sector to get involved with things like schools, water projects, healthcare, and of course, retail centers. But when we look at the upper income Black consumer in South Africa, there's been a tendency to say, well, they're in the townships, and we, from our MAPS survey, we identify high income consumers, and what we're seeing happening in South Africa is that around the townships, there are high concentrations of upper income Black consumers. But what you do find also is that there is a movement away to areas in Pretoria, for example, such as Centurion, Brooklyn, Hatfield. So although they are concentrated in the townships, there are a number of consumers moving away from the townships, but not remotely. They like to, there's a tradition of staying in touch with the roots of in the townships. Interestingly enough, 38% of this upper income category work for government, and a further 31% work for state-owned enterprises. So basically 70% of the upper income Black population is either working for the state or for the state-owned enterprises. About 24% work for formal private companies. A low 7% work for private informal sector, which is partly a reflection on the earnings within the informal sector, but partly a reflection of the tendency to be away from the informal sector and into better paying jobs in government and the private sector. We also look at the fact that about 23%, almost a quarter of the upper income, are claiming that they're getting SACES grants from the government, which is probably approximately 500,000 people are drawing state pensions and state grants, although by means test they shouldn't be. Around Johannesburg, the heat maps show again a great concentration around Soweto in terms of upper income, but we can see quite clearly from these heat maps that there is a spread away and into the previously white suburbs of Johannesburg, including Hyde Park and the rest of it. Also significant development around Westgate, Hillbrow, and well, more Berea than Hillbrow in Johannesburg. In terms of the percentage, about 59% of LSM 8 to 10 is living in Gauteng. 72% claim to be single, and just under 50% say they have no dependents. This is very important because it impacts on the way they spend their money, where they choose to live, what accommodation they choose, where they do their shopping, how they shop, and which brands they're buying. So it's significantly to understand that distribution of the upper income. If the upper income is your target market, obviously we can do the maps for any level of income. Shopping malls across Gauteng, we've mapped them and we've got their trade areas. The map shows the significant concentration of shopping malls across Gauteng. And when we look at the trade areas of the super regionals and regional shopping centers, we see those areas where we saw that distribution of the upper income Black consumers. We see a significant coverage by the larger malls in the Gauteng province. And then, of course, there's a number of small and regional shopping centers where we also need to have an understanding of their trade areas across Gauteng. We often ask, for example, what happens in the townships with malls. So looking at Dobsonville, Jabulani Mall and Protea Glen, we map their trade areas. We get an understanding of the impact on informal traders, for example, spaza shops and the like. And so we are able to get an understanding of how these malls are impacting on the township and township trade. Moving down to KwaZulu-Natal, I beg your pardon. Again, we see the concentration of upper income Black consumers much around Mlazi, to a lesser extent around KwaMashu. But interesting to see, for example, those that know Umgobaba, you're seeing a significant developing area down the south. So being able to map and model these pockets of upper income earners, we are able to say and make predictions as to where we see growth going in the future and where opportunities will exist for malls, for outlets in the future. Looking at Durban's mall trade areas, the super regionals trading pretty much up and down the coastline, and the regionals adding to south of Durban. Moving to Cape Town. Cape Town is very much a concentration around Khayelitsha in terms of the upper income consumers, but we do see pockets of them in other areas. About 6% of the upper income Black consumers are found in the Western Cape. And when we look at the malls, the trade areas of the malls, we see if you just hop back to that, we see the concentration of upper income consumers around here. And when we then look at the trade areas of the super regionals and the regionals, they're not really covering this area. It's much more in terms of the small regionals that are covering that area. Using the maps data to understand the shopping malls that are used by upper income Black consumers, all those blue lines or bars are Gauteng trading malls. So it's significant to see that out of the top 10 malls, 8 of them are from Gauteng, 1 from KwaZulu-Natal, the Galleria, and Liberty Promenade down in the Western Cape. We need to also understand the shopping patterns and where they're shopping. And if we look at where they're doing their bulk shopping, ShopRite, Pick n Pay, Spar, Checkers, Boxer, Macro, and to a lesser extent Woolworths. In terms of their day-to-day shopping, the spaza shop is significantly important in terms of where day-to-day shopping happens, even with the upper income Black consumers. Very much more so with lower income Black consumers, obviously. ShopRite, Pick n Pay, the township supermarkets, and other local shopping malls. Now, it's important to see that those retailers that are reaching out to the township areas are definitely gaining market share, and we see that significantly in the future. When it comes to how do people shop for clothing across the country? Maps is telling us that when it comes to their purchasing motivations, they buy where they get the best value for money. They buy from various clothing stores, so they're not always very loyal to any particular brand. They wait until the specials come. They shop around for the bargains, and they buy clothing at branded boutiques. So branded boutiques only accounting for about 10% of the motivation for clothing shopping. So significantly, where we're trying to understand the development of malls and looking at the growth and the patterns, again, being able to project the information, the data down to a township level, so we can see where that motivation and that buying pattern is happening at a township level. In terms of rural and township shopping centers, Vukani Vukile, for example, is telling us that their shopping centers are gaining significantly and bouncing back significantly well, and much more so in the township and local rural malls, much more so than the urban malls. They also recently reported that the Black Friday event, they saw about 18% more people in Bukile's shopping malls compared to in 2022 compared to 2021. They're also reporting a 15% higher footfall over Black Friday weekend as a whole. So their township and their rural and their township malls are doing significantly better in terms of turnover. What we're seeing also is Mr. Price, for example, acquiring a share in Power Fashion. Mr. Price taking a controlling share of Studio 88, and so we're seeing a significant movement of the retailers into township areas. What is important also is to understand the other, not only the Swazi shops, but there's a huge development in terms of hairstyling and salons. You know, moving from really upmarket, the diva kind of outlet, down to the Dumusa, who's just the local guy who cuts hair, as sort of typified by these illustrations. Our estimates and talking to our partners that we work with, we work very closely with Casinomics, which is headed up by Gigi Alcock. For those who have been involved in supermarket development will understand that Gigi has many years of experience in townships and in spaza shops, for example. So importantly to keep an eye on what is happening in all sectors of retailing in the townships. In terms of our estimates of spaza shops, we're seeing about, well, we estimate about 70,000 what we call kasi forecourts, and this is an outlet which is in the front of and attached to a residential home. We're estimating about 30,000 spizerettes, which are sort of in the supermarket formats, as this photograph shows. About 1,000 cash and carries and the midi wholesalers. Midi wholesalers are largely owned by Somalians, where they get together and do a lot of group buying and selling to local spazas and spazarettes. Our estimates of the sector is about 160 billion. It was predominantly immigrant, but we are seeing a resurgence of local South Africans into that market. The pharmaceutical and Muti outlets, another important area. We estimate about 10,000 Muti and informal chemists and health shops in and around the townships, and significant growth in pharmaceutical products and pharmaceutical opportunities in the township environment. Also to keep an eye on is our estimated 44,500 licensed on-premise outlets, generating about 110 billion per annum. So, and what we're seeing from these photographs is the level of sophistication of these outlets in the townships. And gone are the days where we would go to a fairly basic sort of shebeen. Well, they still exist, but they are, as you can see from the top right-hand corner and the bottom left-hand corner, significant improvement in the quality of the decor, the quality of the outlet. As is typical in many townships, there's a high concentration of business. And what these heat maps of businesses show us, after we've mapped our more than 150,000 outlets, we get an understanding of how these concentrations of businesses are happening, and also, of course, in relation to population. So it's important for retailers to understand the demographics of the area, and then to look at the competition in terms of local and informal shopping in those townships. Casinomics and Gigi, and ourselves have put together estimates of what the Casinomic economy really looks like. Our estimates of about 100,000 spazas across the townships, generating in excess of 150 billion rand. About 50,000 what we call Kasi Kos, which is Kasi Foods outlets, about 50,000 of them, generating about 90 billion. About 500,000 tabletop operators and hawkers, about 150,000 Muti traders, about 18 billion. Spazas and backroom rentals. Again, spaza rentals are generating, we estimate, around about 25 billion, and backyard rentals of about 20 billion into the township economy. We make these estimates based on research that we've done in terms of backyard dwellings in South Africa. Also, we did a project for the Royal Bafokeng Nation to do an in-depth understanding of backyard economies. And we use satellite imagery and our estimates from research to get to these numbers. About 45,000 licensed taverns and shebeens, generating about 110 billion. We estimate about 50,000 hair salons, with about 60,000 specialists and barbers, generating about 10 billion. About 80,000 auto traders, which are, Kasi mechanics, panel beaters, and then of course you've got what we call the Bucky Brigade, the guys that operate out of the back of pickups and doing all kinds of deliveries. They're also builders and bakers and providing services. These estimates of the turnover, the SPASA turnover, we've taken the estimates issued by Trade Intelligence. The MIDIs and SPASA RETs, that estimate comes from Custonomics, from their work that they've been doing on the ground over the years. Again, the Kasi cost comes from their estimates and their research over many years of what is happening in the townships. The taxi numbers come from transactional capital. The rental, again, as I said to you, it's the research that we've done is also spatial and satellite imagery. The MUTI estimate comes from different sources, including, for example, the South Africa National Biodiversity Institute, and also the work that has been done by Pretoria University. And again, working with brands, we get an understanding from brand owners to the extent to which the salon business and the products that are within the salon business are being consumed in the township areas. So significant opportunities exist in the townships, and we believe this will continue to grow. Also important to look at what we call the rural frontier markets, because there are significant developments happening in towns such as Mthatha, Pongola, Burgersport, Giyani, Putaditjaba, for example. So there are a number of opportunities developing across these, what we refer to as rural frontier towns, to a large extent have been ignored by many retailers and mall owners, but we do believe that there is significant opportunity in these rural towns, particularly when we take the demographics and competitor stores and work with what we call accessibility modeling to understand the opportunities that exist. So if we're to look at the trends, Pick n Pay, QualiSave, USave, these guys are all, and Boxer, have all targeted the townships specifically, and going at the lower end and really getting out there and making significant inroads and doing significant business. Macro continues to decline. We see as a wholesaler, it doesn't have a strong township location or township located businesses. OBC Chicken and Roots Butcheries have identified the Kasi food operators as a potential market, and are doing significant wholesale supply to the informal sector, and it is growing pretty fast. And then, of course, we're seeing the growth of the independent wholesalers such as KitKat and Devland. Where does this happen? We're seeing a demand for retail space outside the malls in the townships. I pointed out earlier on in that slide where we were looking at the 3 malls in Soweto and getting an understanding of the opportunities that exist for and where people are looking for growth in smaller malls, but in proximity to the larger malls. And also growth in the rural towns. Exemplar is probably a very good example of how they've focused their business on the rural towns. Excuse me. And where do we see the growth coming? We see the growth coming in appliances and electronics, home decor, home improvement. We're certainly seeing a significant improvement in that, increase in home improvements and upgrading of homes in the townships. Clothing will continue to grow. Personal healthcare and beauty, we've seen the numbers that we're estimating, and we're seeing continual growth there. Alcohol in the retail is driven up by the on-premise, often on-premise consumption, and growth. What we're also seeing is a growth in smaller pack sizes and in staples. So what we do as a company is we use our spatial data sets to enable marketers and retailers to discover opportunities at a very local level. So it allows for the layering of data, one on top of the other, at a very local township level, for example, or suburb level, so that you can then understand crime in relation to economic development, in terms of the population sizes, the age of the population. And so you build your picture significantly, and you get a more in-depth understanding of the opportunities that exist at that township level. And we link the data to the exact township boundaries, and that's very important. Nobody else is doing this, so that when we're presenting data on a particular township, it is only that particular township we're talking about. It's not a KZN projected down. It's actual numbers, and we use this significantly with a number of our clients to develop sustainable route to market strategies, because we give them an understanding of the extent to which there is demand, and on the supply side, what the competitive set looks like. We use accessibility modeling extensively to develop optimum retail locations and networks. We've completed studies for operations like McDonald's, where we've done a 5-year restaurant rollout strategy plan for them. We've done a lot of work for the motor trade and other significant retailers across the country. So it's important in our accessibility modeling, we don't just look at an isolated site, and we don't just do a site suitability. What we do is we look at the site in relation to the network, in relation to competition, and what impact a new site, for example, will have on the rest of the network. And we do that for both growth strategies and reduction strategies. And the data is available on various data portals, where we can provide access to stakeholders within your operation to get a much more in-depth view of the township activities. Thank you very much for your attention up to now. I hope I haven't gone on too long, but we'll certainly take questions if there are any.
Thanks, Bob. Definitely some interesting takeaways from the presentation. Just a reminder to the audience, if you'd like to ask a question, just use the chat box or raise your hand and I will unmute you. Maybe to kick things off from my side, Bob, you have a slide that points to the different retail centers in Gauteng. I think a key concern many of us have is that, SA is over-retailed. Do you share this view, specifically focusing on the township areas?
We believe that the upper income areas in Gauteng and also across the country are pretty well overshopped. But we have identified significant opportunities in the township and rural areas. So it's a case of looking at your strategy, your long-term strategy, and saying, where do we want to be? what size do we want to be? What size do we want to be, super regional, or do we want a township? Do we want a neighborhood mall? Do we want a local mall? So, you know, looking at the demographics of the area, looking at the supply of other malls and around the area will give us an indication of where to go. But I do believe that the upper income areas are overshot.
So then the follow-up question I'd ask is, you know, with regards to which province or area do you see the biggest growth potential, or at least that you feel is under-retailed, if you had to mention one or two?
You know, I think we're seeing the Eastern Cape as coming up with opportunities. Obviously, it will depend on the individual target markets that individual mall owners would be looking at, but certainly in terms of the 5 or 6 ones that I mentioned there earlier, Tata and Burgersport. These are the areas where we're seeing significant opportunity and growth.
Thanks, Bob. Paul, any question from you before we go to the chat?
Yeah, thanks, Rid. Just Bob, on the rural frontier town, do you have a sense of that opportunity? I know you gave a sort of overall number for Spazarettes for the the food side, 150, 160 billion rand. How big is this frontier sort of part of that in your view, and how do you see that growing, and where are the opportunities? Thanks.
I think we're seeing, again, if we look to those few townships that I highlighted there, looking at the population growth, Soweto's population growth, Khayelitsha's population growth, we're seeing significant opportunities in those areas. Again, it depends on who your target market individually, where you want to go, what you want to do there. But yeah, I mean, difficult question to answer in sort of broad terms, but my focus belief is that we are going to see over the coming years significant growth in rural and township markets.
Let me sort of maybe put the question slightly differently across the sort of township areas you've looked at. How has Spaza stores or the size of the market trended? If we take food, Spazas, or whichever subsector you want, over the years, has it become a bigger part? Obviously, it sounds like it's growing, but I'm just trying to get a sense of how that compares to formal retail in those areas. Has formal retail really taken share, or does it sounds to me like there's still obviously a big informal sector there, and if anything, it's remained as big as it was of the total, for example, food retail market, perhaps, or has it declined? Would you say?
We believe it's growing. There's a definite growth there. The malls are they do take have a significant impact on the informal trade, but on the other hand, of course, they're significant contributors to economic growth within the townships. So that the mall itself, provides a lot of economic development opportunities, income opportunities, and of course diversity for consumers who are able to go to one area, one place, and have a wide variety of choice. So I think we'll see in the future, I think probably the development of smaller malls in the townships to start with, but significant growth in opportunities available in those areas. But Spazas will definitely continue to grow.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Just going to the chat box. First question from Chiamo Masike. Good day. Do we have an idea of how much of the estimated returns are taxed?
No, we don't. I mean, I'm sure SARS would love to know that. And again, we look at it for various studies, and we asked them, the store owners, are you registered in any way, and significantly not. And I believe that it's important that we rather looking at the carrot or the stick approach, and move away from the stick and the penalties and everything else, and rather give them carrots to ask, to encourage them to register, because there's significant opportunity. I mean, the taxi industry, for example, but of course the unregistered, I mean, they don't pay their speeding fines or their traffic offence fines, so they don't pay SARS. So a low level of registration, but we've got to find ways to get into that market.
The next question from Maud Modise. How much of this is cash versus card payments? Do you guys have any insight into that?
Transaction, yeah, I mean, predominantly cash, obviously. And where shop owners have an account, they're usually using their personal bank account. There is significant growth in electronic payments happening, and we're seeing card and electronics as definitely as a huge opportunity and growth in these markets.
Do you by any chance have a percent of what is card at the moment?
I don't have it offhand. No, I can get it. I think I can get it, but I don't have it offhand.
Sure.
And I'll make a note of that.
No problem. Next question from Matthew Sherritt. How much of the township economy activity you measure is reflected in the official Stats SA data?
Stats SA doesn't do a good job in the informal sector in terms of measuring that sector. And so there is a gap, a significant gap in terms of the reflection of, I mean, for example, when we look at the unemployment numbers, the unemployment numbers show significantly high numbers of unemployed people. And when you're in the townships and you see what's going on, and you know what, for example, we're seeing in our various research projects is, you ask a person, are you employed? And they say, no, I'm unemployed. That's because he's a qualified plumber and he can't get a job as a plumber. He's now working as, doing odd jobs all over the place. But in his mind, he's unemployed. He's an electrician or a plumber, or he's got a qualification, but he's not using that qualification because he can't get a job in that sector. And so, numbers you have to look at quite carefully. But Stats SA does underestimate a lot in those areas.
Wilhelm Notes has got his hands up. Wilhelm, would you like to unmute?
Sure, thank you very much. My question is, why is economically active population increasing, and how do you reconcile that with poor economic growth and high unemployment? That's my first question. And my second question is, why do you think that rural retail recovered quicker than metropolitan retail?
I didn't catch those. The sound on this side was.
I also typed it in the chat box, so you can follow it there. But yeah, I suggest you read it there.
So just to repeat, Bob, the first question: how do you reconcile the growth in economically active people with rising unemployment or low economic growth?
Well, I mean, again, what you're seeing a lot in the township is the extent to which guys are operating. You find a lot of people get into those open a spaza because they lost their job in somewhere else. They might have been in banking, for example, and the bank's branches have been culled, and the guys are having to do something, and they get into either a little spaza shop themselves, or some other form of informal trade. So the informal trade is providing job opportunities for a lot of people, much more so than the formal sector. The formal sector has been shedding jobs. We've seen that, and what we're seeing in the township areas, specific townships, okay, where we and again, a lot of those the townships don't include the informal shacks. What happens in a lot of cases is the township's boundaries. On the fringes, you have the informal settlements happening, and there is a perception that those are part of the township, but they may not be officially into that township. So you do get this feeling that there's a lot of people living in squatter camps and well, informal housing, and therefore they're not part of the economy. But we do see this growth within township boundaries of the economically active.
And then the follow-up question, why did rural retail recover quicker than metropolitan retail?
I guess numbers. I mean, I haven't had the in-depth discussion with Vukile on that, but I read their report last week, I think it was, where they were talking about those malls were the ones that were growing. There's also a question there on the impact of social grants on rural economies. Significant numbers of advantages, and it's also changed the way certain peaks are happening within the retail trade, for example. So traditionally, it was the end of the month, the money came, and you get a peak at the end of the month. What we're finding out is that there are those peaks for those that are employed, but those that are getting grants are sometimes getting grants throughout the month or middle of the month. And so what we are seeing is a kind of a smoothing out of or sort of mini peaks throughout the month as those social grants are accessed. But it's had a significant, and I believe that if although it's hugely expensive for the economy, if the social grant program wasn't in place, we'd have a lot more civil unrest within this country.
The next question from Jan de Wet. What information do you have with regards to the looting and unrest we had in 2021 in these township areas as to how that impacted economic activity?
Okay, we rely on the South African police to issue that data. I mean, where we can can report it, we do. The unrest had a significant impact. I mean, we saw footage of the larger malls, the macros that were being looted en masse, and of course set fire to. But what has happened, what happened to a lot of the township traders was also very, very significant. It didn't receive the media coverage that the high impact macro type invasions gained. But there was a significant impact on informal traders.
Hannah Clayton has a hand up. Hannah, please go ahead.
Hi. You had a nice slide on the breakdown of bulk and day-to-day shopping between the retailers. Would you mind going back to that slide, please?
Sure.
Yes, that's the one. So yes, so I have a question about this. So you've mentioned that you see the spaza shop market growing, and you say that the formal retailers are also taking market share from them. So are you seeing the split changing? When was this data from?
Well, I mean, those guys that are the formal, let's call them formal retailers that are seeing the opportunities there will have an impact. But again, a lot of the spiders are on the way home. They round the corner. They're much closer to the household than the the malls are, for example. And so the strategy needs to be for them to grow and take market share from the spaza shops would be towards securing locations, particularly on the high streets, but also securing other locations where the concentration, and you saw the example of Tembisa, how when you heat map them, you see this how densely concentrated that competition is. And so by looking at those the concentration of competition and looking at the demographic or the target market, the demand side of the equation, there are, that's when you start to decide where am I going to go and how am I going to do it. I still think that spiders will continue the growth because of their numbers and because of their locations.
Okay, thank you.
The retailers that are taking opportunities, as we see with Massmart, doesn't have a strong township presence or easy access for the majority of township dwellers to access their outlets.
Thanks, Bob. In the interest of time, maybe a final question from Paul, and you can close off.
Sure. Thanks, Ridwan. You highlighted some of the upper LSM Black consumers' purchasing habits in your slides. In fact, this was one of them that's up there now. Is it the same on spend on clothing and healthcare? If you look at the clothing stores versus informal or pharmacy, Clicks Discount versus other sort of healthcare in the townships. Just trying to get a sense on that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the pharmaceuticals have been slower in jumping into township markets than the rest of the retailers have been. Definitely a growth opportunity for them. The product sales that we estimate are significant, and talking to some of the distributors of the amounts of money that are going through those outlets is significant. The first part of your question was again
just on clothing as well. I'm just trying to get a sense.
Clothing as well, yes. I think on one of the slides I highlighted that the growth areas that we saw: appliances, clothing, pharmaceutical. Across the board, there's growth opportunity in these townships, and it's again, what is your focus? Where's your target market? Now, we can map as we map the heat maps of the upper income. We can do the same thing with lower incomes. So a marketer who's looking at the lower income group might have a significantly different footprint or picture in terms of concentrations than those upper income groups do. So there's opportunity again with data available, and that is, I've been our focus is to look at data and gather data from as many sources as we possibly can. We now have we've used Stats SA data, for example, the General Household Survey over the years from 2000 to 2021-22. We've mapped that data. So again, we have a variety of different data sets that we apply our minds to when we're making these forecasts.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, maybe last question from my side. Bob, non-urban areas have a strong high street retail offering. Do you see maybe retail behavior changing where we see guys moving away from high street to shopping centers, or do you think high street will still play a big part going forward?
No, I mean, look at the patterns that we see in terms of shopping during the week shopping and the weekend shopping. Again, weekend shopping, the malls, the bigger malls with the variety. It's a consumer experience, which the smaller, obviously Spazo's type environments don't offer. And I think we will see the malls growing in that area and taking market share, and where weekend experience is an important aspect for many township dwellers, and I think we will definitely see growth in those. Again, it needs to be analyzed in terms of the size of the catchment area, the complexity of the catchment area, and things like crime statistics, have an important impact on where I would put a mall.
No, thanks, Bob. There seems to be no further questions. I hand over to Paul for closing.
Yeah, thanks, Ridwan. Yeah, so just on behalf of Nedbank and all the clients, thank you, Bob, for joining. From myself, Paul Steegers, and Ridwan Lunat from Equity Research, thank you. This call was recorded and the presentation, we have it. So if anybody would like a copy, I know there's been a few on the call, just let us know, send us an email, and we should be able to share that with you. So Bob, thank you again for your time, very much appreciated. All the best, and everybody take care. Speak soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.